This is about Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass. I watched a show on the Erie Canal, its construction and its effects on the destiny, if that's not too strong a word, and in this case I don't think it is, the destiny of America. As a quick and thrifty shipping line, the Erie Canal fueled expansion to the west, creating booming cities and new states. It was so successful, it was deepened and widened twice. Yet many thought the canal should not, and even could not, be built. It was too big, too complicated, and too expensive. The federal government vacillated. It would strongly support it, then it would back away. No funding there. Finally, Governor DeWitt Clinton raised $1 million and said, "Let's get started." Much of the canal was dug out locally by farmers. Sections appeared and began to be connected. Many locks were needed. It was, in fact, very big, very complicated, and very expensive. But it also proved to be one of the most singularly successful constructions ever completed, certainly in the still young nation. Towns flourished along its route, some becoming cities. Other canals were dug. In the east it was canals. In the west it would be dams. In response to the rowdy behavior that sprung up along the canal, for rough sorts were needed to dig it, religions sprang up, as well as temperance movements and groups of abolitionists. The effects of the Erie Canal went far and deep beyond its impressive financial record. And I learned that both Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass published their writings in Rochester, New York. That was the place of my birth, and while I was aware of both, and have been for many years, I'm not sure I knew that both had done much work in that city, elevated in great part by the Erie Canal. I'm pretty sure I knew that Anthony was connected to Rochester, and that's a good thing because she considered it to be her hometown, and she is buried there. She was born to Quaker parents in Massachusetts and raised to believe in social equality. She began her activism by distributing anti-slavery pamphlets, but when she hooked up with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the two of them began protesting for both women's rights and freedom for all slaves. In 1872, Anthony was arrested for voting in Rochester. She refused to pay the fine, but officials declined to take further legal action. Not long after that, she proposed an amendment to the Constitution for women's suffrage, the right to vote. Early on, she was accused of being a troublemaker and attacking the institution of marriage, but she was antagonistic in principle, not spirit, and in her lifetime became widely, internationally accepted. She died 14 years before her amendment was adopted by Congress. Frederick Douglass did work out of Rochester, but he was not tied to the city like Anthony. He published a newspaper, the North Star, out of a church in Rochester. The motto of the paper was, "Right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the Father of us all, and we are all brethren." Frederick Douglass is a giant, a miracle. I confess that I love him and have for many years what I have known of him. After several attempts, he had escaped from slavery in Maryland by hopping a train and going to Massachusetts. Educating a slave was considered dangerous because a slave could read and write, and they might want to be free. Douglass, for the most part, taught himself to read and write and speak. He simply invented himself, putting those tools to work for the rest of his life. He was slavery's worst nightmare. He believed in equal rights for everyone, most especially African Americans and women. He became widely known as an orator, a preacher, a social reformer, author, abolitionist, but he considered himself, above all, to be an agitator. He understood that only persistent agitation could overcome so great a foe as slavery. He spent his life chipping away at that tremendous wrong and the subsequent evil that followed it, that being segregation, Jim Crow, deep-seated racial prejudice. People said that Douglas himself was the greatest argument for racial equality, that such an imposing, commanding figure could have once been a slave. He wrote 3 autobiographies, each of them detailing not just his life, but the terrible treatment of his people. Frederick Douglass has always seemed like something of a dream to me, and I think his people were fortunate to have such a champion. Yes, a champion. What Jack Johnson did in the boxing ring, that is what Frederick Douglass did before the whole world. If the Erie Canal had anything to do with his career, that would be one of its foremost blessings.